Welcome everybody to the webinar, and this is being recorded, so the conversation we're about to have today will be something that you can reference for later. My name is Troy Dumoulin, and I'm a Vice President of Research and Development here at Pink Elephant, and we're here to talk about value. And the conversation about value is a big thing right now, always has been in the context of service management, but there's a conversation around value being multidimensional. And it's not just about getting the customer what they want. That is a part of it, but how do we even understand that concept of expectation or managing to meet expectation? We'll be looking at lean a little bit in the conversation of definition of value because it gives us a good understanding of how to go about looking at that question. But on the slide you're going to see here, I have coined this term called Agile Service Management because that's exactly what we're going to be doing to deliver increased value. Agile in the sense of we need to be nimble, fast, a bit higher velocity, be able to change directions based on the dynamic nature of our industry, but also service management because we are still in and always will be in the business of delivering value via services. So how do all these conversations around Agile, Lean, and DevOps and ITSM, how do they all connect and how do they relate to each other? That's exactly the question we're going to answer in this webinar. So you might have noticed that the conversation has changed in recent months, maybe even 18, 24 months. A few years back, a few months back, you might have been having conversations around availability, robust, maturity, security, resilience, compliance, capability. Name the adjective that has to do with something stable and robust, and that was kind of what the media was focused on. In fact, all the webinars, we're dealing with those topics, vendor product pictures, conference agendas, you name it. It was all kind of, stable and secure. Now, you've probably noticed that many of the webinars are moving the other direction. It's like someone flipped this switch 180 degrees. In fact, this is the basis for a Search CIO article that I just wrote about the quest for fast flow, because that's exactly what's going on here. We see the conversation has changed. It's focused now in the Agile space, and you're seeing Agile come from this concept of a software development niche aspect to now dealing more with product management and or overall project management. In fact, many people have been quoted to say Agile is the fastest adopted methodology for project management. We're talking DevOps, and what is the question of DevOps? Trying to accelerate collaboration, increase fast flow. We're seeing structural changes in the evidence of a cross-functional team, and this premise of leaning out our processes, right? It's all talking about how do we go better, faster, cheaper, speed to market. Again, it's this context of this almost 180-degree switch. So why? What's driving this kind of odd behavior or the focus change? Well, I like to use this slide, and I use it frequently because it really does it provides an interesting context of why we've changed so rapidly in our conversation. And it's not something unique that's hit IT, because the same issue has hit many other verticals in the past. And it's simply this. You'll note on the left-hand side, we have this increasing rate of demand. So we've got this spirit of streaming, instant on, built on the web economy where it's, the expectation is value delivered is immediate, if not yesterday. So we have this growing intensity, if you will, in the concept of demand. And our ability to supply has and did keep up for a period of time. That's this dotted line. But at some point, I'd say 24, 48 months ago, the industry as a whole basically hit a brick wall in the context of keeping up the pace of supply with demand. Now, you might say, well, that was a few years ago, actually. But you know what? What we have been doing is compensating. We've been giving in our nights. We've been giving up our weekends. That's why you're all doing your email at 10 o'clock at night. And the reality is we kind of volunteered our time, which we're not being paid for, to basically keep trying to make the hamster wheel work, keep going at the speed that you can. Our challenge is that we can't invent new time. So after we've thrown in all the volunteer hours, the reality is, how do you compensate? So what's stopping us from scaling to meet this demand, from increasing our ability to, speed up in the current state or status quo? is what we've always known about, but we haven't dealt with. That's the fragmentation. We have processes that appear multiple times, systems that we have redundantly. These things are not well integrated. In fact, we are living in a situation where we haven't dealt with the technical debt or the refactoring that's been required for some years, and we've been putting it off, and now it's time to pay the piper. The reality is that complexity has now inhibited us to meet this demand. And so what we're seeing is the business demand and that red line going higher. Our ability to actually supply, I wouldn't even say is actually staying stable, because we're still adding complexity. We're adding new systems without removing. We're adding new vendors and suppliers, cloud providers, et cetera. And so that dotted line could actually see it trailing down bottom right. So that's a non-tenable situation. So this is why you're hearing the hue and cry in the industry right now. It's a simple economic condition called demand and supply inequity. And this is why we're focusing now on how do we get back to this value proposition, and what is value anyway. So a quick pause button here in the context of what is a service management organization. Agile has always talked about, it's a set of specialized capabilities for providing value. Okay, so that capability has to be in the context of the business ecosystem we're existing in, whether that's online banking, or that's healthcare, or that's deep water drilling, higher education. That capability has to translate into something the business actually cares about, which is outcomes to an end market consumer. What you might not be aware of is, what is a service organization versus a technology-focused organization. Because while we've had service management around for some time, the reality is most organizations which have been adopting the practices around ITIL have really stopped that incident, problem, and change and never moved forward. Very, very few have moved into this service orientation. Even if there's a catalog involved, it's typically to enable a request fulfillment process. So one way to kind of give you a sense of how do we deliver value is to understand that a service organization actually has three core architectures. Now, we know what a technical architecture is, right? It's that thing that basically allows us technology-wise to connect all these different devices and components to produce a technical solution. So we know what it is to manage a technology architecture. However, that technology architecture delivers value only in the context of service. So, the reality is many people talk about, or they make the point, we are very busy, but we're busy doing technical optimization. To understand how value is delivered, you have to understand that a business service, we call it online banking, which has a product called the checkbook or an account, right, because the service produces the product. That online banking business service has supporting underneath it an IT service called online banking, because it's actually a good thing to do to name it as close as possible to the business enabled capability. Underneath this IT service called online banking, I have another service called hosting, another one called storage, network, and so I have this taxonomy of outcomes which in evidence basically produce an outcome to an end market consumer. So that's the value prop there. But there's also another component to this, which is the process architecture, which is simply this, and I'll show you a picture of ITIL in a very different form than you've perhaps seen it before, which is more in the context of a horizontal value system. In essence, I have processes for having conversations with a consumer, external market, a customer. I turn those into requirements. Those requirements get into build and specification. We have to validate. We have to move to production. We get to support. So I want you to imagine this horizontal value chain, which we're going to look at now, because what is the difference between a technology and a service organization? Well, you can actually use this one diagram to describe it. A technology organization has three architectures, the three that you see here, but it only governs and manages one. A service organization, or an organization with a service orientation, understands that there are three architectures and that the technology and the process architecture only exist to deliver services. So in one case, there are three, but only one is governed and managed. In the other, there's an awareness that there are three, and we try to do something about all three. So a big part of how I'm going to describe value is that you have to be aware of what are the value enabling capabilities of an IT service organization. It's not only technology. If you're not enabling and managing with intent both the process and the service architecture, in essence, you're trying to deliver value without understanding 2/3 of what it actually means to deliver the value. You're managing only 1/3 of your capabilities overall. So to understand value proposition from a service perspective, that's the first conversation, that there are 3 core architectures. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. What does the customer consider valuable? And that's actually a good starting point, is that Lean talks to us a lot about voice of customer, taking an outside-in perspective. To understand what a consumer actually values, you have to understand who that consumer is, because even one consumer will have a completely different perspective of what they value. So we get into customer segmentation. Who is my customer? Which customers are more important to look at based on the mission of the organization? I get into this: who is my customer? What do they value? And how would I understand how to define services around that component? So this is where Lean gives us a bit more perspective on value. So if it begins with understanding who our customers are and what they value, there are 3 primary dimensions to actually understand, qualify, and also measure. So we begin with the question of quality at the top. So quality actually comes in 2 flavors. Think of it this way. I get what I expect, right? I pay for something and it's not something else. I have a certain mindset around feature and function, and it's delivered according to my expectation. However, feature and function, not the only aspect of quality, because there's also the concept of warranty or non-functional requirements. So it's great if you give me this wonderful service, but hey, if I am found with it and then I'm arrested and put into an orange jumpsuit, I'm not going to be very happy with you. So the conversation of quality has to have both function and non-functional requirements. Supplier integration, disaster recovery, information security. This is where risk management comes in. Now, still, this is not enough to understand total value. If you think about it, if I'm given something or I receive something and then I say, yeah, it meets expectations both functionally and non-functionally, but I only get it 6 months after I'm expecting it, there's a problem here, because I could go, my competitor, first of all, can probably get it faster because they're a built-on-the-web organization. They don't have all the legacy and all the technical debt. So their agility for innovation, it leaves me breathless and also leaves me without clients because they can do it faster. So this challenge with speed also is critical to the, is it a value? Imagine you're getting your daughter a birthday present, but you show up with the birthday present 3 weeks late. I would think there would be a mismatch with expectation here, right? Because the birthday was the target. There has to be a speed constraint here. Now, the other side of this is more and more organizations are finding the cost of IT to be more than they're willing to pay, largely because we have all this legacy technical debt. We have all this variance and redundancy. I mean, the reality is we have to be able to get there at speed, but also within a cost factor. One of the things that actually we think about when we talk about Lean concepts is that a major part of Lean is the reduction of practice and systems, not the increase, because we have multiples of everything today, practically. And unless it's a strategic product that gives us differentiation and gets me more customers, then there is no business case for having multiple ticketing systems or multiple monitoring systems that do the same thing or multiple asset repositories. We have so much variability. There's only one thing that variability can actually produce, aka cost, but also complexity, defect rework, which in essence slows down speed and reduces quality. So I can't not deliver on all 3 if I'm going to actually understand what is value. So that kind of takes us into the next conversation. So we get to understand the value from all 3 dimensions. And it's interesting to note that at different times, at different customers, those three dimensions change priority. Sometimes it's speed, sometimes it's quality, sometimes it's cost. That's the natural order of life, and we're always constantly being aware of where we are right now, kind of the triangle of dimensions of value. So come back to the process architecture perspective we looked at a few moments ago. In essence, we are a supply chain. You might not have thought of it that way, but on the left-hand side, we have customer engagement, where I'm getting demand, I'm getting requests, I'm getting requirements, and which is a good thing, by the way, because that keeps me in business as a service organization. Then I'm going to take that and put it into the factory, plan, build, and I'm going to move it to operations to run. So in essence, we are an enterprise IT value system in principle: plan, build, run, strategy, design, transition, operation, use whatever words you'd like. But very few organizations operate like that. They operate more in a vertical alignment of task specialization, key competency, silo mentality. And the challenge with local optimization is that if you're not paying attention to how work flows across the entire value system, left to right, you have no clue where your bottlenecks are, where you have redundancy, and that, again, localized perspective will increase variability, increase cost, and reduce speed while reducing quality. Our problem is, this is what is called enterprise IT. But in my experience, enterprise IT, for most of us, is a myth. I have a governance thing that is looking at the entire value system and is governing the horizontal. How many organizations actually have governance at the enterprise level? Not many, in my experience. They'll govern each silo separately and have different priorities and strategies for each silo. Continual improvement. Again, it's one thing to get localized CSI, but if I'm going to understand how to increase speed and reduce costs across a system, I have to look at it like that, a system. So our challenge is, again, one of the issues we're facing here is that enterprise concepts, system of delivery and value, this is one of the challenges we face. And to speed up and automate, because that's one of the things that DevOps is going to focus on, automating the tool chain across this entire enterprise flow, we'd actually have to understand the enterprise in this way. Interesting premise. So this is where Lean comes in, right? Lean gets us to begin thinking about value systems and value streams. And, we have a value stream in the context of plan, build, another one in the run, but those two are connected in an enterprise value stream. But it all begins at the left-hand side of our equation, which is, who is my customer and what do they value? What do they describe as critical to quality? Because it'll be those things which I define as critical to quality, which will be the basis of my performance measurement, my service level agreements. Again, if we're going to do things in a fast and cost-effective way, we can't have multiple ways of doing the same thing and make sense of that, right? We have one of the speakers at our conferences, Neil Nicolaisan. I love his model where he talks about systems of differentiation, systems of parity, and systems for partnership. And basically, he says this: if it is and a system, by the way, is not just technology. It could be a process, it could be a technology system. It's a system for execution, right? So two dimensions on this model. If it's a system of differentiation, it gets me more customers, but better market share. And it's a system that is critical to mission. Well, there we have a case for variety, variability, and perhaps, custom build. However, that has to be high on both equations for that to be true. If it's actually not a system of differentiation, everyone has a LAN, everyone has an ERP system, everyone has a BRM function, then why would I have more than one of them? Well, why would I have more than one change process? It's critical to mission, perhaps that's true, but it's not going to get me more customers. So what we're talking about in that context is a system of parity. It just makes me on par, have to have it, but having more will actually be detrimental to my overall goal. Then if it's a differentiating system that is not critical to mission, we have a system for partnership. Makes sense to probably go, try this out, but right now it's a nice to have on the side. So again, Lean would focuses on standardization, because unless it is a system of differentiation, there is no reason to have more than one. We get into other tools like Kaizen problem solving. That gives us a sense of, okay, we've got gaps all over the place, problems. Agile tells us about problem management and gives us some basic understanding, but it doesn't give us a lot of tools. So with Kaizen and Lean, we get into DMAIC, we get into concrete tools for problem analysis and solving, and it's a great way to combine the concepts of service management with Lean to, over time, improve all three aspects of value: quality, speed, and cost. Another key premise of Lean that basically focuses on this continuous flow premise of velocity and horizontal velocity is you can't govern what you can't see. That sounds relatively simple, but when everything is siloed and there's no visual that I can actually apply to how does work flow across the system, leveraging a Kanban board or a scheduling system, then how do you expect to know where the problems are? So visual management, critical. Performance metrics. Well, we get into this premise with Lean measures around cycle time and lead time, which measure the throughput of the total system or process that we're working with. So I won't go into too much detail here, but small batch is simply the work concept of it's better to work in small iterations and working units versus large ones, such as a sprint versus a large project. Work in progress says if I'm not managing my work in progress and I don't pay attention to how many balls I've juggled in the air, I'm going to pay the price. I'm going to overburden and basically, challenge any individual to get work done because they're going to be overburdened. That means going slower and actually making more mistakes. But the other side is, it's called context switching. The more things you have on the go, the more balls in the air, the more you have to then switch between them. And so the reality is, and research shows this, that if you have more than 3 major tasks on hand, you will begin to lose productivity just by the nature of context switching. Right, so there's a lot of things here that Lean says, how do we get better, faster, cheaper? And that's why you're going to see it as the basis and the parent of other things. So I want you to take this view here. On the bottom, we've got this horizontal value chain, right? We've talked about. It's one of the 3 core architectures that produce value. Lean thinking says you are in this value chain. It's horizontal, not just vertical. But see, the reality is that we've been under this pressure of demand and supply for some time. And it's not the totality of the enterprise that experiences it all at once. So what happened in the development space back in the mid-1990s was they, were facing this demand and supply inequity. They had all this backlog of demand coming at them, and literally we call it a backlog. So they had to find a way to get higher flow. So they turned to Lean practices like small batch, call them sprints. They talk about value-based prioritization, which is basically building a customer-oriented pull system for prioritizing what's in the backlog. They focus on problem solving, which is it's a retrospective in the conversation of an agile Scrum process. They focus on feedback loops, which is the customer engagement, and small iterative batches so that we can actually figure out once we get through the first sprint, should I keep going in this general direction or should I change direction completely, reassigning my resources, being more dynamic in my agility, if you will. So what you see in the Agile movement in the 1990s with the manifesto coming out in 2000 was basically the application of Lean thinking to software, Lean software development. And because in IT we like to rebrand and repurpose, we call it Agile, but that's fine. Now, what unfortunately happened next wasn't intended, but it was simply the cause and effect of any localized improvement. So I want you to remember that plan, build, run concept, right? The total horizontal value chain. So Lean says, great, if you optimize anything, it's going to go faster on the flow side. It's going to move stuff left to right quicker. Now, the challenge with Agile is it's only development. So it accelerated flow in plan build and pushed it right downstream to the next process step called move to production. This is the world of change and release. The problem here, though, is that without accelerating that part of the value system as well, what we ended up with was a bottleneck, which is theory of constraints, because all systems have bottlenecks, but the bottleneck will constrain or govern the total speed of the overall system. Now imagine all of this stuff flowing downstream hits this bottleneck called move to production. I have this little inventory piling up in front of it now, and now I've got an overburdened work step. What happens when you overburden? Lean teaches us, that thing will actually fail. It will get sick, go away, break down, whatever metaphor you want. But the reality is, without understanding work in progress, optimization, and limiting, we actually decrementally impact the overall system. So this is the birth of DevOps. From the trenches of release engineering, we heard the cry, stop the insanity, right? Can't Dev and Ops work together? We need to look at the whole value system. So the initial evolution of DevOps was simply a reaction to Agile being too narrow in scope in optimization. Now DevOps has grown a little bit from there. We'll see in the next slide, it now includes other practices. But the first world of DevOps was this concept of release engineering, move to production. So the concept of DevOps, though, has been evolving because it is, quote unquote, an emergent conversation and practice. So now DevOps means more than just, release engineering. It actually means many things. So the word DevOps is really not a framework per se. It's a word to describe a collection of practices in order to improve value realization and moving from requirements to delivery as quick as possible. Back to this concept of value being all three. Value delivered as quick as possible at lowest cost. So what is DevOps? It's all of the above. We're accelerating what? Right? The previous slide I like to call the accelerators. We're accelerating the things we've always done on the left. Accelerating service management, software development, project management. How do we do that? Well, we're going to use lean practices. How do we do that within development project management? We're going to use Agile in the context of small batch iterations. Theory of constraints has to teach us that we got to watch our bottlenecks and watch out for overburden. We're going to create cross-functional teams. In the Agile space, they started this, but they were just the dev folks in that team. So now the DevOps team includes more than just dev folks. They include the people who also deal with non-functional requirements, because remember, quality is also about non-functional as well as functional requirements. So I'm now dealing with supplier and integration of security and risk and compliance, right? Support. That's the DevOps structure teaming concept coming at you. But it's also about doing things technically a little bit different. So continuous integration, well, maybe not so different. ITIL version 1, software control in configuration, right? Good versioning and good code check-in has always been something we should talk about in service management. But there's also this continuous delivery component, which is building architectures which are less monolithic and more decoupled services, microservices. So I can change little bits of my overall model with standard API integration, basically drawing down and pushing down the risk and compliance. So this is a way we can do this in an architecture premise. The last component being, once I've got this premise of horizontal value stream in mind, and literally in mind and visually can see it, in the past we've had point solutions at each part of this value chain. Wouldn't it be cool if we take these point solutions and hook them up like a train track? So we have planning systems at the top part and the front end. We have design build systems. We have test systems. We have provisioning and move to production systems, and we have support systems and monitoring systems. And then, of course, ticketing systems. Well, guess what we're talking about? A DevOps tool chain is linking together the systems that deliver value as well as the processes. Remember, back to the three core architectures. So the last point of our conversation here, because this is DevOps, which is a word and an expression to mean all of the above from this whole conversation of increased value generation. I'd like to look at service management principles a little bit differently than maybe you've seen them classically in the ITIL theory, right? Because in ITIL, it would present the process architecture for service management, but leave out the software development or the build practice. And it would also have it in a circle and going around and around and around, continually improving itself. I want you to look at this a little bit differently. So here's the same processes we've always known and loved in a horizontal value stream. We call this an operating model. On the left-hand side, we have sources for demand intake or engagement. We have strategic engagement through VRM. We have tactical engagement through catalog, back-ended by request fulfillment. We have people calling in operationally to a service desk. All of this information flows in as request and demand for improvement or enhancement or correction. That has to go into strategy in respect to how does that imply or impact my overall portfolio, right? Investment decisions on whether net new or refactoring or continual improvement should be done, right? That will then charter my build practices in the middle, right there in the center. That's your factory floor. Now I'm going to do it more iteratively, yes, releases with sprints within them and iterative feedback loops. But note that that's a conveyor belt, right? You're moving things left to right, but coming down from the top, feeding the non-functional requirements are the service design processes around availability, capacity, IT service continuity, service level management, to name a few. And as we move to production, I'm going to have to make sure I do things in a coordinated, orchestrated way. So I'm going to want to do that with proper change and release engineering. This is a key concept because without that kind of orchestration component, landing planes in a common runway called production would not do very well. At least I wouldn't want to actually personally fly into that specific airport. So we need the orchestration processes around transition. We then are delivering value, and it's only delivered when it's actually in run and it's in operation. So my technical and business services are, actually now being consumed and used. Chances are we're going to have a few things we learned along the way, right? That's the bottom. There's my little CSI forklift, shifting things left, making sure that we have a feedback loop in the entire system, not just per process, but the whole value chain. So same concept, but what I'm showing you is in a horizontal perspective. And what I'm showing you is also how service management, traditionally ITIL, is a kind of a wrapper around the center nugget of value called, build, and how they all work together, which is not something you see in an ITIL book. Typically, you say, here are the, the processes, and yes, there's a software development and project methodology, and you should link to it. Again, it's better to see it than to talk about it. So this concept of agile service management is applying all of the principles we've talked about so far. And so what do you get, kind of wrapping us up here? This is what I like to call all of this is agile, this flexible, dynamic service management, which is value generation. And I like to sing the song, Agile Service Management, Better Together. So let's start with the business goal. I'll give you 3 examples. So the business goal, as you see at the top of this, is improve requirements generation and prioritize value delivery. I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing the right things first. So starting in the left corner, I would have conversations around voice of customer and critical to quality. That tells me what I need to know. What does the customer value? How am I going to do that? I'm going to use in the right corner processes around business relationship management, demand and portfolio management. Going to shift down bottom left corner. Now I've got my marching orders. Now I can turn to my teams, and they're going to use that information to order the product backlog and to assess how to deliver value in a prioritized way. Now, how am I going to automate this? Then we're going to increase, the decoupling of our architecture, increase our automation of our right now point solutions into this linked up tool chain. We're going to get a smoother flow because the tools we use for flow are now smoother in integration, left to right. These 4 things come together to get me better requirements in faster flow, right? Let's talk about another way we can look at this. Let's talk about it from the process perspective. So how do we improve flat flow? Left-hand corner again. Well, we've got all these ITIL processes. Some of them have been adopted. Some of them need to still be looked at. But let's look at them from a lean perspective first. Let's not go because the book said this way is the way to do it. But how do we go back to first principles, optimize versus maximize the level of control, right? So we look at lean, look at the ITSM process through a lean, fit for purpose, adopt and adapt basis. Eichel's always said, by the way, adopt and adapt. Lean gives us a thinking process to do that. Now that we know what we're going to do, yeah, we're going to focus on value-added activities. And one thing that Agile does really well is says there are necessary meetings, sprint planning, review, retrospective, but they have maximum time durations called time box. So you do need to meet, but meeting can't be the goal. So most of the time you're going to spend in this iteration, it's got to be focused on value. That means that when you're doing meetings, they're going to be time boxed. They're going to be maximum duration meetings. Visual management gives me a sense of bottom left corner. Where is the hold up in my flow? Where are my bottlenecks? Where do I see basically things crashing within the overall value system? Can't see it unless I see it. One of the ways we need to do this is standardize our tools back to this variability. We can't have, if it's only a system of parity, or shouldn't have, maybe the better word, multiple systems for doing configuration management or monitoring or ticketing, because those are not systems of differentiation, they're systems of parity. So we have to standardize, which is, by the way, an interesting premise. We talk about the digital transformation and this automation component of the DevOps premise. But there's a couple of interesting questions you would have to answer first, by the way, before you'd actually get to that digital transformation promise. The first one would be, can we all agree there's one way we're going to do something? I'll let that sink in, because that is an interesting question. And then once we agree this is the one way we're going to do something, then what do I make sure that I'm doing just enough? I'm going to lean it out. I have to make sure that I've optimized it. And then once I've leaned it out, because I don't want to automate something that's not leaned out first, there's going to be situations where, yeah, great, automation works in this case, but in these cases, we have an exception. So we have manual triggers for intervention. What are they? What's your response going to be? And then the final question is then, how do you automate it? So before you can grab onto this dream of digital transformation and tool chain automation, there's a people change question you have to answer, which is always the people change issue we have always faced. And then the last one here, systems thinking. Right? This is what we're talking about. This horizontal perspective means everyone in the system is going the same direction. Because if everyone's being agile in different directions in the system, the question then has to be, what happens to velocity? So it's not about everyone being agile in their own direct direction, because that would actually denigrate and impact overall system velocity and agility. So we have to come up with a way of getting better collaboration. All right, so how do we do this? Well, again, once we know we're in a team and we each have a visual component of that team, a Kanban board is a great way to say, okay, who's got the baton and where's the baton going next? So visual management greatly increases the collaboration. One of the things I love about Agile is that it's a real leveler of ego, because really in a Scrum team, you can only be three things, one of three things. You're either the product owner, speaking of the heft of the business, you're the Scrum Master, the coach, or you're a developer. Regardless if you're a developer or not, that's just who you are. Because it's about leave your ego and your specialty skill at the door. We're all a team, and these three things equalize us. So they're, you can't say I'm an architect and that's not what I do, or I'm a server person and that's not what I do. This collaboration spirit is also about the culture of teamism. The tool chain, this is again, no such thing as a point solution. We're in a system of value, so we need a system of tools. Interesting premise. We love to teach system thinking to our customers, but when we go buy our own tools, we typically buy best of breed. Not exactly going to help us with the reduction of variability, increase of flow, and reduction of cost. And this DevOps concept builds on the Agile premise and says it's not enough just to invite the dev folks to this teamism. I need to understand the whole value chain also, right, in the tool but also the team collective perspective. So all of these practices, from Lean, from service management, from DevOps, they all create better collaboration. So if you find this an interesting conversation, I do, one of the things that we're doing now at Pink Elephant is that this is the question that we're being asked over and over and over again in these webinars and the, conference sessions we're doing. And how does all this stuff work together? And so we've come up with a one-day primer / overview to basically answer this question. Because what's happening today is that you have these 4 different tribes. There's the ITIL tribe over here, there's the Agile tribe over there, there's folks doing the Lean thing over there and the value stream analysis, and on the right we got this DevOps stuff going on. And so we got these 4 tribes, and they're literally working at cross purposes, or at least they're competing for resources. Again, that's not going to help us in delivering higher value. What we need to take the opportunity to do is describe how these 4 tribes should be all working together, because they are better together and not 4 distinct things. So telling this story about Agile Service Management, I believe, is one of the critical components of how we're actually going to increase value and optimization. Better quality, increased speed, reduced cost. So this one-day primer that you see here, you see the modules, is to answer each of these. People coming from different angles, they're going to have a part of the story already, but perhaps they don't understand the full story, and we're spinning our wheels just arguing semantics and basically believing we're part of different tribes versus part of a value system. So if this is an interesting question for you to answer, this is definitely something we can help you with. It's a one-day overview focusing on a deeper dive into each of these 5 areas: service orientation, and then the 4 concepts, what we're calling Agile Service Management. So I hope this has been an interesting session for you folks. And if there's any questions, I wouldn't hesitate to answer them. So thank you very much. Let's just see here. I know I see a lot of points where I was kind of silent at the beginning. I'm sorry about that. We got it going. Any questions that I can answer here? All right. What does this mean for official ITIL? Should there be a reduced scope ITIL essentials? So an interesting question. Official ITIL simply says there are processes around strategy, design, transition, operation. Now, in the official ITIL book right now, we have things like under transition, like evaluation, design coordination. In reality, how we typically implement those is in a more simple fashion. So for me, transition really means a couple of key things. It's change management, which is coordination, release and deployment, and that includes evaluation and testing and validation, and configuration management. In fact, I think config should be one step before that in design and include asset and software configuration management. So what I think is true is that in the future, service management has always been evolving, right? We've seen several evolutions. In fact, if you go to my blog, and the blog's right there, I just recently posted literally yesterday, an article called IT Service Management Evolved, and it talks about the major evolutional stages that ITIL has gone through, and I'm predicting a 3rd evolutionary stage because of the conversation we're having right now, where all of these things have to now be considered for fast flow. So I do think there's a simplification, and I think it's coming, and you'll see that in my blog post. That's a great question. I don't think it's going to be ITIL version 4. It could probably be more along the line of, the 2011 new edition. We're just simplifying and optimizing the value chain. Any other questions? All right, thank you for the good comments there. Well, it looks like those are questions, folks. So thank you very much for attending the webinar. And again, if you have any questions and you're excited about this concept of Agile Service Management and how to tell that story back at home, we would be more than delighted, of course, to have that conversation with you. Take care and have a great day, everyone.